Good morning, everyone. Can I please have your attention just for the next couple of minutes? Good morning, everyone. This morning is a Level 2 hearing. Under Level 2, the public gallery will be closed. Only a few accredited journalists will be allowed into the hearing room whilst evidence is being given at Level 2. Everyone else will be able to view proceedings in the annex, subject to the 10-minute delay. No one, whether a member of a legal team, an accredited journalist, or members of the inquiry staff or contractors, will be permitted to bring an electronic device into the hearing room. This includes mobile phones, smartwatches, even if switched off, AirPods and vapes. This is a direction of the chair, and breach of this direction is a criminal offence. Although this message is stated regularly, it is very important that we are not complacent, so please do check your pockets and bags now for any devices. The inquiry security team will be able to arrange safe storage of any such devices during Level 2 hearings, so please do ask at security for help. And please remember to allow sufficient time to arrange storage of your facilities when you are returning to the hearing room after breaks. Thank you.
Ms. Pottle.
Good morning, sir. You have before you Dr. Paul Russell.
Yes.
May he be sworn.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. Do sit down. It's probably more convenient, and anyway, that's where the microphones are. Speak to them if you would. The questions will come from over there.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Dr. Russell. My name is Emily Pottle, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Could you state your full name, please?
Paul Russell.
Dr. Russell, you prepared a statement for the inquiry, is that right?
Yes, I did.
If we could pull that up, please. It's inquiry reference 005990. On the screen in front of you should be the first page of that statement. And if we just turn to the last page, please. Yes, it's hidden under a data protection redaction, but you signed that statement, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you have a chance to read the statement before giving evidence today?
Yes, I have.
And is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is true to the best of my knowledge.
Sir, may that statement be adduced into evidence?
Yes, it may. Dr. Russell, bits of it may turn up on the screen in front of you from time to time, but there'll probably be bits. Have you got a hard copy if you need one?
I do, sir. Thank you.
Well, that's fine. What I'm interested in is what you can tell me. You're not bound by anything that you've said in your statement, but it's some distance in time now. If you need to refresh your memory from anything there, by all means do.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
Dr. Russell, I'm going to begin by asking you some questions about your qualifications and your role in the medical response to the Salisbury and Amesbury poisonings. You are a qualified medical laboratory scientist with a PhD in medical laboratory sciences and an MSc in medical microbiology. Is that right?
My PhD actually is in muscular dystrophy, not strictly medical laboratory sciences.
Right.
You are a member of the Royal Society of Biology and a chartered biologist. Is that right?
Yes, the Royal Society of Biology. Yes, that's correct.
And you are a fellow of the Institute of Biomedical Science and a chartered scientist.
That's correct.
You were appointed a consultant in medical microbiology and virology at Salisbury District Hospital in 2012. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you have held a full-time consultant contract at Salisbury District Hospital since 2020. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
We've seen a document, a slideshow prepared by the witness FT49. We don't need to bring it up now, but your name appears in that slideshow as the CBRN lead. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Do you have specialist training in CBRN?
Yes, I've had specialist training in CBRN.
And I think we're all familiar with that acronym now, but that's chemical, biological,
Radiological and nuclear.
yes. The appointment as CBRN lead, that was an ad hoc appointment.
Yes,
in
CBRN lead where or for whom?
for Salisbury District
For
Hospital.
the hospital.
For that period of time.
Yes.
And the period of time was?
From the start of the incident with the Scripples, and then resumed essentially for the second incident involving the Mr. Rowley and Miss Sturgess.
Oh, I see. That's why you say it's ad hoc.
Yes.
Got it.
It's not a formal role.
No. And you were involved, it follows from that, of course, in the medical response to both the Salisbury and the Amesbury poisonings. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Before I ask you about that involvement, I'd like to ask you a bit about your knowledge of the signs and symptoms of organophosphate poisoning.
Sure.
Now, I'm sure it follows from your specialist training in CBRN that you are familiar with the signs and symptoms of organophosphate poisoning.
Yes.
And so,
I expect we'd like to know, Doctor, what your familiarity was with them before all this began.
I was aware of the symptomology of organophosphate poisoning prior to the events that occurred of 2018.
Yeah.
You do receive some sort of knowledge from your medical training when you learn about the effects of various drugs and things.
Mm-hmm. And when did you do the specialist CBRN training?
It's been over a period of years.
Right.
as for signs and symptoms of the poisoning, were you aware that they included increased salivation,
Yes.
sweating,
Yes.
meiosis,
Yes.
seizures,
Yes.
muscle fasciculations?
Yep.
And that's twitching, is that right?
Yes. It's a worm. It's like a worm crawling under the skin. It just looks like a wriggling motion of the muscles under the skin.
I see. Respiratory depression
Yes.
at an advanced stage leading to coma,
Yes.
and of course, cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
I'm now going to ask you about your involvement in the Salisbury poisonings. And I'm here at looking at paragraph 5 of your statement. On the 4th of March of 2018, you were on duty as a locum trust grade doctor in the emergency department at Salisbury District Hospital. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you were on shift, I believe, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on that day. Or actually, sorry, 10 p.m. on that day. Is that right?
I was on shift from 8 o'clock till 8 o'clock.
I see. I see.
So that day you were a locum in which in the A&E?
In the A&E department.
Yeah.
Is that a consultant's role?
It's not a consultant's role, but it's something that I did from my past, and I just continued it on after I got my consultant post.
I see. Thank you.
When did you first become aware of the two patients, Yulia and Sergei Skripal?
I saw them in the department on the 4th of March, although I didn't know who they were
At the time, yes,
at
of
the
course.
time.
Yes, of course. Do you recall, I think in your statement you say that at about 4:40, the emergency department was alerted to an inbound female, GCS3,
Yes.
is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And we've heard a lot about this, but that's Glasgow Coma Scale 3.
Yes.
It's the lowest level, unresponsive.
Yes.
Okay. And you describe in your statement the alert was for an unidentified unconscious female of an unknown age who was unresponsive to any form of external stimuli.
Yes, we didn't get any more information that there was a female GCS3 inbound. That was the only information we were given at that time. There was no further information about the case.
I see. You record in your statement that the duty anaesthetist, accompanied by his supervising consultant, attended the emergency department,
They did.
and the supervising consultant was Dr. Cockcroft. Is that right?
That's correct.
We heard evidence from him a few weeks ago. He attended to Sergei Skripal, is that right?
That's correct.
He needed immediate interventions, is what Dr. Cockcroft told us.
Yes, that's correct.
But that at that stage, Yulia Skripal was more stable. Do you recall that?
I think Yulia Skripal actually was more sick than Sergei Skripal was.
Right. But I think with Dr. Cockcroft, he took over the care of Sergei because he needed those interventions, whereas I believe Yulia Skripal already was intubated when she arrived. Is that right?
Well, let the witness give the evidence. Is that right, Dr. Russell?
Essentially, what happened was Sergei was treated by Dr. Cockcroft and one of the emergency department consultants. Yulia Skripal was treated by the other anaesthetist and another one of the emergency department consultants. So effectively, you had two teams working on two patients at the same time.
Yeah.
Yulia was sickest by the fact she was intubated and she was, at the time, I believe, not breathing on her own. She had to have assisted ventilation. So by definition, she is far more sicker than Sergei was, who was able to support his own breathing at the time.
Yes.
And was either of them your patient?
Not strictly in the sense that I owned those patients. I assisted with the resuscitation of Sergei in that I effectively, from what I recall, I was to get intravenous access and to get bloods from him, but I had nothing to do with the airway management or the head end of the patient.
Do you recall speaking to one of the attending paramedics?
Not directly on that occasion. I did hear comments from them, but I didn't speak to them directly in terms of a handover.
Sorry, I didn't mean in terms of a handover. In your statement, you say that you spoke to one of the attending paramedics and was told that the male patient was found with a woman.
Yes, when we got the alert, we were told a female GCS3 and the first patient that was wheeled into the resus department from that call was a male patient. So obviously I was confused about what was going on because we had no forward information that we were receiving two patients, of which one was a male patient. So that's the only time I basically said, "Who's the bloke?" That was my question, and that's when I was told that the man was with the woman.
I see. I'm now going to take you to paragraph 8 of your statement, where you describe the care that you provided to Sergei Skripal. I think you said you assisted, in your statement, you say that you assisted in the resuscitation. Is that right?
That's correct.
Can you tell us a bit about what you can recall in your assisting in Sergei Skripal's care in the emergency department?
Like I say, as far as I can recall, I was to get intravenous access and to get the blood samples off him. And also I got an arterial blood gas, which is where you have to feel for the pulse in the wrist, and then you essentially put a needle in to take a blood sample. It gives you a indication of how well he's oxygenating. So even though he might be breathing, it doesn't necessarily mean the oxygen is coming from his lungs into his blood. So the blood gas actually gives an idea of how well that system's working.
Mm-hmm. I see. Did you request blood tests?
I did.
And I think you say in your statement that you handwrote the lab request form for toxicology. Is that
I
right?
did, yes.
Is that for one or for both?
Sorry.
For one or for both?
For the blood.
Patient.
Just the one. Just
Sergei.
just for Sergei.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I hadn't thought of it.
Yes. I think just to clarify that you didn't have involvement in Yulia's care in the emergency
Not
department.
directly, no.
Okay.
And when I wrote the toxicology, I had to handwrite it because there's no specific request on our computer system for toxicology, apart from paracetamol and essentially aspirin.
I see. What drugs were you testing for? Do you recall?
I wasn't. I was just doing asked for a toxicological screen with the assumption it would be sent to a laboratory to look for the likes of drugs of either prescription drugs or the common illicit drugs.
And I suppose it follows from that at the time, that was a possible diagnosis. Is that right?
Yes, I believe this.
So illicit drugs, would that include fentanyl? Was that something
Yes,
you were
it would.
concerned about?
Yeah.
And so there's a possibility being explored of an overdose. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, I'd like to ask you about something said by a paramedic, Louise Cox. There's no need to bring up the statement, but I will give the reference just for the transcript and for Sir's note. Louise Cox's statement is reference 004931. And what I'm going to ask you about is a statement she makes at paragraph 2, page 5 of the statement. She explains that she was the paramedic treating Sergei, and she says that when she arrived, she gave a full handover. And then she says, when I left A&E, I heard the doctor, she doesn't specify who, make a call to Talkspace. This unit assists to find a cause of the presentation. Was that you? Did you call Talkspace?
No, I didn't.
Do you remember who did, or that the call was made?
No, I don't recall.
Okay. And I think you already told us that you didn't receive a handover from the paramedics on that day. Is that right?
I didn't formally listen into the handover because essentially, as I've stated, the patients weren't, for want of a better word, mine. Mm-hmm. That's probably the best way of describing it.
Yes.
And if I may put into context, I was already looking after 2 patients in resus before the arrival of the Scripples.
So there are presumably other things happening in the accident
There are,
emergency
yes,
department
yes.
at the time.
I had been in the resus department since 2:30 in the afternoon, and I already had 2 patients under my direct care.
Yes. Do you recall what time you left the emergency department that day?
I left the emergency department around about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the evening.
I see. And do you recall when you left, where was Sergei Skripal? Do you remember?
He'd gone to intensive care.
The next day, the 5th of March, I'm here on page 3 of your statement. You had a call at 8:30 in the morning about the patients you had treated. Do you recall that?
I do.
Who was the call from?
The call was from our chief nursing officer, Lorna Wilkinson.
Okay. And what did she tell you?
She said, we have a problem. Those 2 that were poisoned, I said to her which 2 were poisoned because I wasn't aware that we'd now moved on from a drug incident to a poisoning incident. She told me that the man that had come in was a Russian double agent.
I see. And did she say, why was she telling you this?
Because she wanted me to come in.
And did you?
I came in straight away, yes.
And you attended the incident room in the hospital,
That's
is that
correct,
right?
yes.
Okay. And why were you there? What was to happen there?
They were calling me in for my CBRN expertise and experience, given that events overnight had taken a sinister turn in the discovery of the identity of the male patient and his background. I can only sort of tell you what I heard overnight, that there was a lot of details and toing and froing between police and various organisations that led to a CBRN incident being declared. And I was asked to come in to provide advice to the trust and the chief operating officer at the time who was running the incident.
So a CBRN incident had been declared and that results in a phone call to you, does it?
It's not an automatic thing,
No,
but that's how it essentially worked, yes.
So you were called in not to provide treatment to the patients, but to advise the trust, is that right?
Yeah, to advise the trust. Yes, essentially to advise the trust.
And you were giving them advice about what exactly?
The first question I was asked was whether the night staff from the intensive care and the emergency department could go home because they were worried about possible staff involvement and staff poisoning from the 2 patients that had been brought in. I was also told that 3 patients had been decontaminated and gone through the emergency department as well, of which one was a member of staff and 2 were police officers. So I was asked to provide what should the night team do from ED and from the intensive care unit.
I see. What advice did you give them?
I asked if any of the members of staff were unwell, and as far as they were aware, there was no one unwell. And I suggested they should go home and they should wash their clothing in a high temperature wash with a detergent, have a bath or a shower, and to report in to the hospital should they feel unwell.
Okay. After you attended to the incident room, you then went to talk to the duty emergency consultant, Mr. Stephen Davies, is that right?
I did, yes.
Okay. Did you also give advice on personal protective equipment that clinical staff should be wearing? Do you recall that?
What, for that at that particular time when I went down to the emergency department?
Yes, I'm reading here from paragraph 11 of your statement.
When I went down to the emergency department, I asked Mr. Davis about the 3 patients that had been brought in.
I see.
And he told me they'd been discharged. So they at that time, they were happy that they were not suffering any effects of a chemical agent. And then I gave advice on personal protective equipment for anyone who came in with suspicious signs and symptoms. And I think I also went up to the intensive care unit and also gave some advice to personal protective equipment as well.
For the staff?
To the staff, yes.
Paragraph 12 of your statement, you say that you reported to the incident room and advised that the response to a CBRN incident would involve Public Health England. Is that right?
That's correct.
So there's Public Health England to respond, to deal with the casualties, and DSTL Porton Down to deal with law enforcement, counterterrorism, and forensic exploitation. Is that right?
That's correct.
And at 10:30 that morning, you made a call to the duty DSTL scientific advisor to confirm that DSTL staff were aware of the incident.
I did.
After that, you went to the intensive care unit. I think you've already
Yes.
told us that. To discuss patients with the duty consultant, who I believe at that stage was Dr. Stephen Cockcroft.
It was.
Okay. Do you remember that conversation?
I do.
What did you discuss exactly?
It was a very quick conversation. When I got told about Sergei Skripal's background, I worked through what I would call my CBRN sieve to think, right, what possibly could happen, because obviously we've been working on the Sunday, we've been working on a fact that we thought it was a drug incident and now it's a CBRN incident. So I was going through my mind whether this was a chemical agent, a biological agent, a radiological agent, and if so, what could it be? And from that, I could work out what the possible sort of threat and hazard assessment was to the patients and, importantly, to the staff at the hospital. So I kind of came up with a differential diagnosis, for want of a better effect, and one of my considerations was whether the chemical agent might have been a nerve agent, given the potential perpetrators of the incident. And I just said to Dr. Cockcroft, do you think it could be a nerve agent or an organophosphate type agent? And he said, no, I'm convinced this is a fentanyl type agent. And I had no reason to dispute that with him.
Yes. Dr. Cockcroft gave evidence to the inquiry on the 31st of October, and I'd like to pull up the transcript. It's at page 27 of the transcript of that day. This is his account of the conversation with you. I'm going to read it out, and then I'm going to ask you a question. Dr. Cockcroft says, I do recall that conversation. It may be that Dr. Russell misheard what I said, carfentanil and fentanyl. Unless you know an awful lot about these drugs, and as an anaesthetist, I know an awful lot about fentanyl. One might assume that they are very similar drugs as they have very similar sounding names. Carfentanil has a potency hundreds of thousands of times greater than fentanyl. Fentanyl itself is an extremely potent opiate. We use it as an anesthetic agent, and we use it daily, and it is extremely dangerous in recreational hands. Carfentanil is off the scale. Then I asked him the question. The way Dr. Haslam described it yesterday, he said, you know, carfentanil is not a drug of abuse. And Dr. Cockcroft answered yes. And I asked him, that would point to a poisoning, and he answered yes. Whereas fentanyl is a drug of abuse, Dr. Cockcroft answered, it is. Unfortunately, it's likely to produce in death fentanyl because it's a very dangerous drug of abuse. And then I said, yes, but the difference for our purposes is that if we're talking about fentanyl, that could still be, if I can put it that way, the drug's overdose hypothesis, whereas carfentanil is not a drug of abuse. It is a poisoning as opposed to an overdose. And he responded, it would definitely be an assassination attempt if one deployed carfentanil. It could only have one purpose, and that's to kill. So Dr. Cockcroft, his evidence is that he was concerned about carfentanil.
I'm not
as
sure
a
that
poison.
that is what he was saying, is it, Miss Pottle? He was certainly explaining to us the difference between fentanyl and carfentanil.
Yes, that's right.
Do you read this as saying that he was asserting that he told Dr. Russell all this?
Yes, his evidence was that he mentioned carfentanil, not fentanyl. And I'm just going to explore with Dr. Russell if that's his recollection.
See what this witness says.
Yes.
I don't recall any specific information about carfentanil. I'm not sure what I may have misheard because I think the conversation was really brief. Because I wanted to check on the patients, how they were doing overnight. And I essentially, having just told you about sort of going through my CBRN sieve, so to speak, I just asked him, do you think this could be a nerve agent or another agent or an organophosphate-based agent? And he said, no, I believe it's a fentanyl or a fentanyl-type agent. And I was, he'd been looking after the patients overnight, so he has more eyes on than I did at the time. So I've got no reason to dispute him. So the conversation was pretty much left at that.
Yes, I understand. And when you say fentanyl type agent, I suppose that would cover carfentanil, would it not?
It would. The fentanyls are a group. Fentanyl is the sort of medical one, but there are a whole series of fentanyls that can be used, analogues, for medical and nefarious uses, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right. I'm just trying to get such recollection as you have of this conversation, Dr. Russell. You've gone to see him to say, as it were, having gone through your checklist of CBRN-type factors, and you've asked him, you say, or rather you've raised with him one possibility, perhaps a nerve agent, and the answer was something to do with fentanyl-type drugs. Was it that he was saying, there are several possibilities, so listen to them all. Was it that he was saying positively, I think it's a drug overdose? Or was it that he might have been saying that he thought that fentanyl or something like it might have been maliciously administered? Or did he not go into any of that and simply say, were you simply confining yourselves to talking about the type of material?
I think we were assuming at the time that this now, given the information we had, that this was a malicious use of an agent. And that's why I think I specifically raised a nerve agent, because of the way we were now pursuing matters. And he felt it was a fentanyl or a fentanyl type agent that had been used as not as an overdose, but as a means of assassinating Sturgess
attack.
Skripal.
Right, got it.
Did you speak to Dr. Haslam later on that day?
I believe I spoke to Dr. Haslam probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I think.
Okay. And I'm dealing here with paragraph 15 of your statement. Do you recall your conversation with him?
I do.
What did you speak about?
Dr. Haslam had taken over the care of the patients as a usual handover that occurs in the intensive care unit. He was more convinced of an organophosphate or a nerve agent type picture in the patients, and he told me about it knowing my background. I said the mainstay of treatment is atropine and a drug called pralidoxime. I said I know what the initial dosing of pralidoxime is, but I do not know what the maintenance dosing of pralidoxime is. And I also offered him access to an expert for expert advice on nerve agent poisoning at the time.
I see. And was that expert advice from DSTL?
It was.
Yeah. Formal communication involving the clinical advice cell, that was started the next day, is that right?
It was correct, yes.
And can you just tell us what the purpose of the clinical advice cell was?
The clinical advice cell was a group of experts that were drawn on a national basis from people from various agencies, academia. I'm not sure who holds the so-called list of those people, but they were assembled to help and provide advice to the intensive care consultants.
Yes, and I'll deal with the composition in this way if I can.
Yep.
You were part of the clinical advice cell.
I was, yes.
Dr. Haslam was part of the clinical
He was.
advice cell, yes. And there were other experts, including FT49.
That's
Is that
correct,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Do you recall when you were informed that Sergei Skripal and Yulia Skripal had been poisoned with Novichok?
The initial conversation was from a DSTL rep at the clinical advisory group. One of the constituents of that group asked the DSTL rep whether we could have the molecular structure of the nerve agent, and the DSTL rep said, I'm not allowed to, or I cannot give you that.
I see. In your statement, you say on the 6th of March, the trust was informed that DSTL had identified a nerve agent in blood samples.
That's correct.
So you were told it was a nerve agent from DSTL. It was just the molecular detail that they were.
Yes, they said they couldn't give us any further information.
Out. Yes, quite.
And on the 7th of March, you went to DSTL Porton Down and you were briefed on the specific agent. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. We've heard in the evidence of a few of the consultants that there were cholinesterase testing machines at Salisbury District Hospital. Were these provided by DSTL?
They were.
I see.
So they came. No, let me make an assumption. Had you already got them, or were they provided now?
They were provided now.
Yep.
As part of the response to the Salisbury poisonings, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. I'm going to move on now from the Salisbury poisonings to the Amesbury poisonings. So you were also involved in the medical response to Charlie Rowley and Don Sturgess's poisoning, is that right?
I was involved with Charlie Rowley, but I wasn't directly involved with Dawn Sturgess.
Here I'm at paragraph 19 of your statement. Can you tell us how you first came to be involved in the response?
I received a call Unlike the first incident, I wasn't on duty. I received a call from the emergency department consultant, Dr. Zavori. He said, could he run something by me? There was concerns regarding an incident where a man was being brought to the department from an address where a woman had been picked up earlier in the day, unwell. There were some suggestions that there may be a poisoning incident, and there were some suggestions of possibility of an organophosphate type picture. However, both the woman and the man were known to the trust and also known to the police for substance and alcohol misuse. He felt, and I believe he said that the police felt this was a drug-related incident, but he just wanted to run it by me. And I offered to come in to just see how things were and to give an opinion.
And do you recall what time you received that call from Dr. Zavor?
It was around about 7:30 to 7:45 on the Saturday night on the 30th of June.
I see.
And apparently before the patient arrived.
Yes, I was...
being brought in, you said?
Yes, I was expecting to see the patient at the hospital when I arrived, but when I did arrive, he still wasn't there.
Okay.
Oh, right.
And you told us that he gave you the information that both the man and the woman were known to the trust, you say, for substance abuse and alcohol issues. Is that right?
That's correct.
Substance and alcohol misuse was your expression.
Yes.
So that wasn't information that you knew. It's information that he told you. Is that right?
That's information that he told me, yes.
Okay. When you arrived at the hospital, you say the man, Charlie Rowley, hadn't arrived.
He wasn't
yet.
there, no.
Okay. Did you obtain any further information before the patients arrived?
No.
No. Okay. I'm now going to take you to the transcript of evidence given by the paramedic Ben Channon, who did the handover on that day. So if we could pull that up, please. It's the transcript of the evidence day 5, pages 91 and 92. I'll read it out, and then I have some questions for you. Ben Channon says, he's actually in the beginning here being referred to his statement.
Sure.
On arrival, we were expecting to be met by a team of people. Although they had stood down the major incident, we still had a critical patient on board, but we were met by only one nurse in the bay, along with security guards also. There was also a consultant there. I know him as Essam, though I'm unsure of the spelling of his name, and a doctor at the hospital, Paul Russell. Russell told me to take my mask off. He seemed quite happy that this was drugs and didn't seem particularly concerned. However, I did not deem this appropriate, so I kept all my protective clothing on. And the chair asked, you are met, in fact, by a nurse, a consultant, and Dr. Russell, is that right? He answers, when we arrived in the room, it was just a nurse that was in the resuscitation bay, and these individuals arrived later as we were transferring the patient. And then there's a question by Ms. Whitelaw. What did you say to Dr. Russell, if anything? He answers, to give context, this was post the handover of patient care. I remember distinctly Mr. Russell saying to me that this was categorically, I remember that phrase, being drugs and to take you don't need that PPE on. Clearly at that point, I had been frightened, for the 2-hour duration with the patient, and my response was that this is personal protective equipment, and I elected not to follow that advice, and I maintained that or kept that level of PPE on whilst being in the proximity of the patient in that room. Did you explain to Dr. Russell your reasons for suspecting nerve agent poisoning? That was all detailed in the handover. Very much so, yes. Did that handover include passing over the clinical record at the time? Very much so, yes. Did Dr. Russell say anything else other than telling you that? I don't recall that. Did you tell Dr. Russell that you had administered atropine at the scene? Yes, yes. You told him verbally as well as passing as part of the team that had eventually arrived for the handover? Yes. Do you recall having a conversation with Ben Shannon?
I recall having a conversation with one of the paramedics, but I didn't know what his name was.
Okay. Did you tell him to take his PPE off?
I probably suggested he could take his PP off, but I do not recall that being the order of events at the time.
Do you recall having a handover of the patient with
Yes,
the
I do.
paramedic? Yes. And do you recall that the paramedic told you the reasons for suspecting nerve agent poisoning?
I do.
And did he?
Yes, I don't necessarily agree with the series of events that's been written by Ben Shannon, but certainly one thing I did recall was I believe he'd been involved in the Scripples incident as a paramedic, and I remember him clearly saying that this was reminiscent of that incident. So I mean, I remember that, and I took that information on board as part of my kind of building up to my diagnostic investigation in what I think or what I thought was wrong with Charlie at the time.
Do you recall having the clinical record from the ambulance staff?
I don't recall having a printed record, and I note that the printouts that I've got are actually printed. The time date stamp on the printouts are actually after I left the department, so I don't recall seeing a printed handover.
Do you recall Ben Shannon telling you that he had administered atropine?
I don't recall that, no.
Don't recall, don't know, or he didn't?
I don't recall him mentioning atropine.
Right.
I'm going to take you now to the clinical record for Charlie Rowley.
Sure.
The reference is INQ 004173. We can see here, I don't know if this is the copy that you said the printout that you were looking at.
Yeah, if you look
Is
at
that
the
correct?
bottom of the printout, there is a date time stamp of the when it was printed.
I see, it says 2249, and so that,
Sorry.
so you're saying that's after you had left?
That's after I
Is that
left.
right?
And also, I'd add, looking at Mr. Rowley's notes, the first printout was actually at 10:15, but it was a incomplete record.
Sorry, 10:15, where do you see that?
That's in his notes.
I see. Well, we'll come on to the full notes
Sure.
in a moment, but just focusing on this record for now. The primary survey says presenting condition, unusual behavior, making odd noises. Patient states feels like he's been poisoned. And then on arrival, called to attend a gentleman who was reported to be behaving strangely, salivating profusely. That is a sign of nerve agent
It is,
poisoning.
yes.
And making strange noises, alerted on arrival that a female at this property today was taken to hospital in respiratory arrest. That's also a symptom of nerve agent poisoning.
It is.
Approached with caution, and due to recent events in Salisbury and the nerve agent attack, crew decided to don PPE. And then if we scroll down to the next page, please. So they follow the 1, 2, 3 steps, which we've heard about. They arrive to find a gentleman, Glasgow Coma Scale 11, increased tone to upper limbs, making incomprehensible sounds, leaning up against a wall, not responding to commands, had pinpoint pupils, That's another sign of nerve agent poisoning, is that right?
It is, yes.
Sweating and salivating profusely. No drug paraphernalia present initially. Drug use was denied by the occupant, and they requested the hazardous area response team and critical care. And then they record that it's just 7:25, the patient slowly collapsed to the floor, became Glasgow Coma Scale 8. He'd been given naloxone intranasally. They achieved intraosseous access because they couldn't do it intravenously. And then in the assessment carried out, the ABCD assessment, which we've heard a lot about, they saw that he had trismus present. Trismus, that is a muscle contraction of the jaws.
It is, yes.
Okay. And would you recognize that as a possible symptom of nerve agent poisoning?
It's a possible symptom of nerve agent poisoning, but it's often seen in unconscious patients in a lot of circumstances.
I'm not sure that I'm understanding the relevance of this. Did you see this at the time?
Sir, I'm going to come to it in a moment.
Well, you've so far been asking a lot of questions based on your reading of it. I want to know whether the witness read it.
Yes. They also note here that there's profuse salivation and suctioning required. And then at the bottom it says, treated such as nerve agent incident with atrapen as charted. Atrapen, what does that mean to you?
Atrapen is an autoject, so it's an automatic injecting device that contains atropine.
Okay. And then it says drugs as given, index of suspicion for drugs overdose. And then if we scroll down a bit further, they record the drugs given being atropine, naloxone, and diazepam. And diazepam, that would be given to reduce the trismus, is that right?
It can do that as well, but it's also an anticonvulsant, so it's used where there may be fitting. I don't know why they strictly gave diazepam for that case.
Okay. So I think you've told us that you don't recall receiving this record.
I don't recall reading it.
No. But you had a handover.
I did.
From the paramedic. Okay. Do you recall him mentioning to you that Charlie Rowley was sweating profusely?
No, I don't.
That he was salivating profusely?
No, I don't.
And I think you've already told us you don't recall him telling you that he had given him atropine.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Like I said, I think he encompassed everything by saying this was reminiscent of his response when he attended the Scripple incident.
I see. Well, perhaps we can approach it a different way. If he told you that it was reminiscent of the Salisbury incident, did you ask him why?
I don't recall asking him why, no.
Is it your recollection that he said that he'd been at the Salisbury incident?
Yes.
This is Mr. Channon?
Yes.
Right.
Sorry, no, I can't. It was one of the paramedics.
One of them.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
It was one of the paramedics that said he'd been at the Scripple scene, and this was reminiscent of that incident. That's the thing I could recall the most during that handover.
I follow. Thank you very much.
I see. But you didn't ask him why it was reminiscent, and you don't recall him telling you about the symptoms?
No.
I see. And you didn't ask him, I suppose it follows, what drugs he had given the patient?
No, I didn't.
Wouldn't it be important for a physician at the emergency department to know what medication had been given to somebody by paramedics?
Yes, it would be. But like I said, I was asked to come in to give to sort of give an opinion from a CBRN point of view. I wasn't going to take over the care of the patient specifically.
But I mean, as we'll come on to, your specialist opinion from a CBRN point of view could be influenced by the medication given to a patient.
Certainly.
Okay. So would you agree with me that it would have been appropriate for you to have asked the paramedics about what medication they gave
It would have been, yes.
and to make inquiries about why they felt that the presentation was in keeping with the Salisbury incident?
I think I made assumptions from the information that I was given prior to arriving, and assumptions from the fact that they were concerned it was a nerve agent, and the information that they said this was reminiscent of the scene. Like I said, I don't recollect a lot of things. They may have told me the stuff, and I just don't recollect receiving that information.
Were you expressing any view about one way or the other, about their thought that this was reminiscent of Salisbury? And
I took it on board, and I weighed that information up, and I weighed up the information I was given from the ED consultant, and then the third piece of information is how Charlie himself had presented. So I then looked at Charlie as well.
Okay. Before we get to your assessment of Charlie, I think you say that you weighed up the information that was given from the ED consultant. Do I take it that that's the information about drugs use?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So did that affect your, well, I think you told us that the ED consultant had told you that they were both known for drugs and alcohol misuse.
That's correct.
Is that right? Okay. How did that impact then your assessment of Charlie Rowley's presentation?
It's part of the information that I was given. So I was given various pieces of information. It's a standard thing you would do for any sort of dealing with any medical patient or in getting a history. Now, Charlie clearly at the time could not give his own history because he was unconscious.
Yes.
So I had the information from the paramedics. Now, I'm sorry, I can't recollect that well what was actually said at the handover. Apart from that, the bit of information that stood out for me was this was reminiscent of the Scripples incident. So I had that information. I had the information from the ED consultant, and then I had the examination of Charlie, and then I would process all those pieces of information together, weigh up that information, and come to some form of a conclusion and an opinion, which I would have sort of stated to the emergency guys that were actually going to look after Charlie.
Yes, I see. Just before we get to your assessment, though, I think you told us that you didn't ask about the drugs that had been given.
I don't recall asking about the drugs.
And you didn't ask about the symptoms, and I think you said that part of the reason for that was that you made assumptions based on the information that had been given to you.
Like I say, I don't recall asking that.
Okay. We know now that the information you were given about Dawn specifically was incorrect. I'm not suggesting you should have known this at the time, but Wiltshire Police accept that they were wrong to suggest that there was intelligence that Dawn had used drugs.
well, it's helpful to you to explain that to the witness, Miss Pottle, but don't forget that as reported to him, the proposition was both history of substance and alcohol abuse.
Yes. Yes, of course. I'm not suggesting that you should have known that information was incorrect.
Well, at least as far as Dawn was concerned, half of that was correct.
Yes.
It's the other half that wasn't.
Yes, that's right. So I think what I had said was that Wiltshire Police accept that they were wrong to suggest that there was intelligence that Dawn Sturgess had used drugs.
Yes, well, that's right, and we've had that several times over, and it's clearly a mistake, for which several people have already apologised. But please, can we approach each witness on the basis of what they know?
Yes, of course. Of course. So what I'm going to ask you now is, before you get to your assessment of Charlie, do you think if you had had the correct picture, which is that Dawn Sturgess, there wasn't any intelligence that she was involved in drugs, do you think that might have altered your approach to the paramedics?
I can't say for sure.
Okay. In your statement at paragraph 20, you deal with your examination of Charlie Rowley. If we could just pull that up on the screen. It's INQ reference 5990. So you say, I waited in the department for the male patient to arrive. He was identified to me as Mr. Charlie Rowley. He was unresponsive, with fixed leftward gaze, pinpoint pupils, and grunting. His vital signs were within a normal range. He was stripped to his underwear for examination. Apart from being sweaty, the evening was warm. There were no signs of vomiting, incontinence, muscle fasciculations, i.e. twitching, seizure, or increased secretions. I felt that the presentation was in keeping with an opiate overdose. I recorded my opinions and suggested as a precaution that we should use the cholinesterase testing machine we had in the emergency department. Before I go on to deal with the cholinesterase testing machine, pinpoint pupils, I think you've already told us, you recognized was a sign of nerve agent poisoning, is that right? You noted that he was sweating, but there was an alternate explanation for that, in that the department was warm, is that right?
It was, yes.
Okay. The atropine that he had been given, what effect would that have had on his symptoms of poisoning at that time?
Atropine may have provided some relief, but based on what I saw of the Scripples, who both received atropine, when they arrived in the department, both the Scripples were still looking were looking severely unwell, and they weren't stable, i.e. their physiology wasn't stable. They required immediate interventions. When I saw Charlie, he was unwell, clearly, but he appeared quite stable. He didn't look like he was deteriorating or any progression of signs and symptoms in the same way that the Scripples were following. So his condition was static, is probably the best way of describing it.
I see. But there could be a difference in presentation of patients depending on the dose of a poison that they received. Is that right?
That's true, yes.
But what I want to ask you about is not about the severity, but about the symptoms that he was showing at that time that you examined him. Do you agree that the atropine would have countered some of the effects, for example, excessive secretions, like salivation?
Yes.
And we know that he was given diazepam. We know that from his record. Could that have helped prevent seizures or muscle fasciculations?
It probably would have prevented seizures. I don't think it would have stopped muscle fasciculation.
Okay. And I think you say in your statement that, of course, you didn't know at the time that he'd been given atropine, and that if you had known at the time, you might have been more cautious in your assessment. Is that right?
I think I said that I wasn't aware he'd been given the duodote antidote, which is the key thing of that is it contains pralidoxime, and there was no record of him being given pralidoxime, either from the ambulance exchange or even on the clinical chart. It's not documented. They say they gave him an Atropen, which I've stated is a atropine autoject, but I believe they gave a duodote autoject, which contains pralidoxime, and it also contains atropine. And we know again from the Scripples, when the Scripples received pralidoxime, their physiology stabilised out. So I would suggest that the pralidoxime probably had a greater effect than atropine in masking the signs and symptoms of nerve agent when I saw Charlie compared to the effects of atropine.
Because in your statement, I believe you just deal with atropine.
I say an oxymatropine autoject in my statement.
I see. So you don't think that atropine would have made a difference to his presentation?
It would have made some difference, but I'm not sure it would have stabilised his physiology to the degree that we saw with the praladoxines, again, based on the experience we had with the scriples.
I see. But would you agree with me that had you known that he'd been given, even from the chart, an atropine, that could have made a difference to your assessment?
It could have done, yes.
Okay, if we just return to the statement here, you say that that you recorded your opinions and you suggested as a precaution that we should use the cholinesterase testing machine we had in the emergency department.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the machine failed, so I suggested that we use the kit in the ICU. This was not done before I went off duty and left for home at approximately 9:30. Did you leave any notes or instructions for your colleagues to ensure that this kit was used?
I was there when they tried using the kit that was available in the emergency department. They told me it was giving up an error message, and I said there's a second kit in ITU. Perhaps you ought to get some bloods up there. Is essentially a verbal
I see.
a verbal handover.
I see. And the reason that you suggested this testing, that was a precaution to rule out, I suppose, nerve agent poisoning, is that right?
It was to rule out organophosphate poisoning, but, because I think here we're kind of looking at two questions. I took on board what the paramedics said. So could there have been organophosphate poisoning? Well, there is a possibility of that. But there are other reasons why organophosphates may have got involved in the system. Now, if you're asking me, could this have been Novichok, then that's a separate question in terms of which they were asking me to think about. So,
Yes. Pardon me, it's my imprecise question, I think, but you suggested the kit would be used to rule out, if I put it more broadly, cholinesterase inhibition.
yes, that's correct.
Okay. Dr. Jukes, his evidence, and he was the consultant responsible for Charlie Rowley's and Don Sturgess's care initially. He says that he was not aware that you had recommended that the point of care machine be used, though he does recall Dr. Zavori attending the ITU trying to find the point of care kit. Would you agree with me that it would have been helpful from a clinical perspective if you had recorded in the notes that you thought that this point of care machine should be used?
It would have been, and I think I did mention about cholinesterase testing in my notes before I left.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I think I did write something about cholinesterase testing in my
In your notes?
in my notes before I left.
Okay. Well,
When the the attempt had been made to get the machine that was in A&E, sorry, ED you call it, don't you, in the emergency department to work, who did that?
What, to put the blood through the machine?
Well, who went and found it and came and found it?
It was one of the emergency department staff.
And who was told that that was what had happened?
We asked for the blood to be put through the machine. The machine gave an error message,
Yes.
and clearly wasn't working. So the message got back that the machine wasn't working.
Yep.
And at that point, I suggested there was another machine in ITU. Perhaps we should get a sample
Quite.
up to that. I didn't follow that action up.
No, but what I want to know is who's we?
Oh, right, sorry. The discussion was between myself, the emergency doctor on duty at the time, and the nursing staff in attendance.
We've got you, Dr. Zavori is the other one, is he?
Dr. Zavori, and I think there was a emergency department registrar or
And a registrar and some nursing staff.
Some nursing staff.
All of whom are there when the attempt is made to use the point of care machine.
Yes, from what I can recall, yes.
And are they also there when, or not, when you say there's another one upstairs or whatever?
Yes, they were. I conveyed that message to them.
Okay.
I'm going to take you now to the records. The contemporaneous medical record is INQ 0004173. Page 6, please. That is not the right page. Could we scroll up, please? Yes, one further, please. I think the note at the bottom, that's been produced by you, is that right, Dr. Russell? Written.
That's correct, yes.
So we can see the entries on the 30th of June at 9:15. It says called by Dr. Zavori. He was the ED consultant, is that right?
That's correct.
At 19:45. And you can correct me if I'm wrong in reading these notes, but I think it says patient admitted earlier, history with signs and symptoms comparable with organophosphate poisoning.
That's correct.
Is that right? And then known IVDU, that's
Yep.
intravenous drug user.
Yeah.
Second patient, this patient, en route from the same address with a similar presentation. And then both known IVDU. What does that say? No other sinister history?
No other sinister history.
Okay. And then information from police suggestive of heroin use. And then if we go to the next page. I think that says on examination, pinpoint pupils, no excessive salivation, slight sweating, but department very warm.
Yep.
Is that right? No bronchorrhea. Is that increased secretions from the
It's increased
lungs?
secretions in the respiratory tract within the lungs.
Okay. And then heart rate 90 and blood pressure. Both of those are within the normal range. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then the respiratory rate is recorded. And it says no muscle fasciculations. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Impression that this is a recreational drug-related issue. Heart can stand down. No hazard to staff. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then I can't read the next sentence. What does that say?
But ensure contact details and safety net.
I see. And then below that,
Where it says apart from hazard to staff, apart from bloodborne viruses, BBVs.
I see. And then blood and urine for toxicology, for toxicological analysis. Is
That's
that
correct.
Right? Okay. And then the entry underneath we'll come to in a moment, but that's not your handwriting, is
No.
it? That's at 10:30, which is after you left.
Yes.
Okay. So when you said that you thought you had made a record in the notes, is this where it would be, or you?
Yeah, that's where it would be, so it doesn't look like I actually wrote it down.
I see. We can see then at that last record, sorry, if we just scroll down again at 10:30, that it says 10:30 starts fitting, gave lorazepam IV. I don't know if you can help us with that next entry.
I think that's anaesthetist, fast bleeped, intubated, CT booked, chest x-ray.
Okay. And so he deteriorated after you had left?
Yes.
And then we know he was admitted to the ITU
He was.
that night? Okay. I'd like to ask you now, after you left the hospital, what was your next involvement with Charlie Rowley and Don Sturgess' treatment? And I'm looking at paragraph 21 of your statement, if that helps.
Yeah, I learnt that he had a seizure later. I think that was on a Monday when I was back at work.
Yeah.
I believe Dr. Jukes had been trying to get hold of me on the Sunday because he became suspicious of both Dawn and Charlie's presentation in the intensive care unit, and he was concerned, and he wanted to get a blood sample to DSTL, and there's a particular mechanism by which you can do that. And he wanted advice on that mechanism. Unfortunately, he tried contacting me via my microbiology on-call phone, and as I was not on call, my phone wasn't switched on, so I didn't receive that message. And then when I caught up with Dr. Jukes on Monday, he said he'd sorted it all out and the blood sample was on its way to the SDL by that point.
I see. And that was Monday the 2nd of
Second,
July.
yes.
Yeah, okay. We know that on the evening of the 3rd of July, DSTL confirmed the presence of Novichok. Thereafter, did you return to the hospital to brief the ICU team and advise them to be vigilant for further cases? Is that right?
I went to the emergency department to advise them that possibility of other cases. I went to the intensive care department to tell them that what they were dealing with was a similar thing to Scripples,
I see.
and to adopt the appropriate PPE.
And you weren't involved in the further care of either of them except for swabbing to look for residual agent, is that
That's
right?
correct.
But you maintained that role of liaising with DSTL.
I did.
Is that correct? Okay. Just before the break, Dr. Russell, I'm going to take you to a document and ask you about your knowledge of the possibility of a discarded container of Novichok. It's a document we've seen quite a few times before, so hopefully we can take it quickly. But it's reference 004704. This is a document that was prepared by the Department of Health. I'm not suggesting that you should have seen it, but it's a document setting out a reasonable worst-case scenario. It was prepared after the poisoning of the Skripals, but before the Amesbury incident. And it considers, at number 2, reasonable worst-case scenario of an accidental discovery of a discarded agent by humans. And then if we scroll down...
Forgive me, Ms. Pottle, have you seen this before?
No, I haven't.
Not even in the last few days or weeks?
No, I haven't.
Right, well, that's all. Just as long as I know, that's all. He's coming to it completely fresh.
Yes. If we scroll down to the second, so this is, number 2 is the scenario with which we're concerned.
Okay.
It says accidental discovery of discarded source material by humans, up to 6 members of the public exposed to source material used and then discarded after the Salisbury incident, including up to 3 children. Material is found in a public but not crowded area. Up to 4 emergency services personnel are exposed, 1 fatality, 9 other casualties requiring prolonged hospital treatment. And if we scroll, in fact, I think we can leave it there. The reason I'm taking you to this document, Dr. Russell, is that it shows that the authorities were considering a possible scenario where a discarded container was found and further people were poisoned, not in a targeted attack, but in an accidental exposure. We also know that police were searching for a discarded container of poison after the Salisbury attack and before the Amesbury poisoning. Did you know that the authorities considered this to be a possibility?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
Okay. Do you think, if you had been aware that this was being considered by the authorities as a possibility, that this might have impacted your assessment of Charlie Rowley's presentation at the emergency room on the 30th of June?
Possibly, but given the background that I was given, that would have blurred That would have blurred the judgment, I think. I think if you had 2 or 3 children come in with these symptoms, then I think you would automatically be suspicious of something. I think you have to look at the information and the background of the patient that comes in. So, for example, as I've said, this was blurred. Now, if I gave you another example, if someone was a farmer and come in with this, then, you know, you could argue, had he been handling pesticide, it really depends on the background of the person who comes in and whether, is there an alternative explanation? Because, as has been alluded to before, common things are common. And certainly for Dawn and for Charlie Rowley, I mean, Novichok wasn't the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Sir, we are at the traditional point for a break. I finished my questions for Dr. Russell, so would
That's
this be an
helpful to know.
appropriate time?
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we'll break until 11:30. Just give me a moment. I want to catch up with the note. Dr. Russell, you're in the middle of your evidence. Please keep things to yourself until you come back. Could you be back, please, at 11:30 to continue?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Nichols.
Try that again. Thank you, sir. Dr. Russell, good morning. My name is Jesse Nichols, and I'm asking questions on behalf of Dawn's family. I have just one topic briefly to ask you about, please, and it arises from the entry that you made in the evening, which is at 4173, page 3. And could we, thank you very much. You recall the entry?
I do.
Can I ask to look, please, at the last 2 lines, which you looked at with Ms. Pottle?
Yep.
Are those 2 lines of information that reached you from the police?
Not directly, but I think the police were the source of the information that I received via the ED consultant that called me.
Thank you. Your answer clarified my bad question, so thank you very much. So you received that information. I just wanted to understand the information chain. It came indirectly to you from the police through the ED consultant. Is that my understanding?
That's probably the best way of describing it, yes.
Can we look at the first bullet point? You've read this out already with Ms. Pottle. Does that indicate that in this entry, among other things, you are considering your assessment and diagnosis?
It will be part of the information I would use to come to my assessment and diagnosis, yes.
Because the first line relates to signs and symptoms of organophosphate poisoning.
That's correct.
Other aspects of the entry relate to other possible diagnoses. Is that fair?
That's correct.
And if we then turn over the page just briefly to page 4 and look at the line about 7 lines down in the text, do you see an entry that reads impression? Can you read that out? Because it's your writing. I think I know what it says, but it's probably safe to ask you.
Impression that this is a recreational drug-related issue. Do you want me to continue?
No, just that entry, please. Given what we've just discussed, does it appear from what you've said that the information you've received from the police, albeit indirectly, was an impact on the assessment that you made?
Certainly.
Yes, I have no further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Nichols. Dr. Russell, that's all the questions that anybody here has for you, isn't it? Oh, I'm so sorry. No, I beg your pardon, it isn't. Now, Ms. Dolan.
Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Russell. My name is Bridget Dolan. I represent the ambulance service, and I'm asking questions to assist the chair with his inquiry. Just a point of clarification. You mentioned about the timing of the printing of that hard copy of the ambulance staff record.
Sure.
But I won't show it to you. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's 004173 for the record. That's the electronic patient care record.
Yeah, that is, because I'm convinced I saw a handwritten record, but I've not, from what I recall, I thought I saw a handwritten record, but I've never been able to find a copy of a handwritten handover sheet, so...
If it assists you, I don't think any of the paramedics are suggesting they did a handwritten record. It was the electronic patient care record that they passed to the hospital. And is the clue to how that comes to the hospital in its name? It's an electronic record which is sent and arrives electronically in the hospital records from the paramedics' electronic terminal.
I believe so.
Yeah. And that means actually at the hospital staff end, you're not dependent, the hospital as a whole is not dependent upon it being printed as a hard copy because it's electronically in the records and can be seen on a screen in the ED department if one looks at the screen.
I've never ever seen an ambulance record on a screen.
So you are dependent upon it being printed out in hard copy, and of course you've said you'd left the department.
Yeah, from what I can recall from ambulance handovers, I've generally seen, as far as I can recall, paper copies and carbon copies. I'm aware of the electronic records, but I don't recall in any case seeing printed copies. Now, I could be incorrect in that. I mean, I haven't done any emergency medicine now for over sort of 5 years.
Right.
So from
So
what I recall, I'm convinced I saw some form of paper record, but I can't find any evidence of that. So it may be my memory failing on that.
I won't push you on that. Maybe we can assist the chair further by providing more evidence about our understanding, but it's not a matter for you. Thank you. Can you help us, though, looking forwards to the future and the learning from Mr. Rowley's case and the assumptions you've already told us that you made? Is there any learning that you've had from this?
Certainly. I mean, in any situation, irrespective of what we talked about today, is always learning in every scenario that you come to.
Sorry, and what is it?
What, for this particular?
Yes.
I mean, the lessons for me are lessons I've always learned. Is always keep an open mind and listen to what you're being told from all sources, to be honest.
We've heard from your ICU colleagues that it was not, Dr. Haslam in particular, it wasn't his practice to read the paramedic record. He relied on later records. And it seems, therefore, Mr. Rowley moves on from ED into ICU. There wasn't the knowledge about what the paramedics had said about the excessive salivation, the sweating, the pinpoint pupils, the trismus and so forth. Is there any learning, or has there been any learning at Salisbury District Hospital you're aware of, about improving that handover of the paramedics' observations, the observations of those who initially see the patient and who treat the patient initially and observe the initial symptoms, about the handover of that information to the treating clinicians after people move on from ED?
I'm not aware of any training or teaching from that perspective. But I'd like to emphasise, in the case of Charlie Rowley, I was not taking over his care in the ED. I was merely brought in to make an observation whether I thought this was a CBRN-related event.
Absolutely, Dr. Russell. I'm not suggesting you're responsible for his clinical care at all. Your responsibility, as we understand it, was you had CBRM knowledge.
Sure.
The Trust recognised you might have more than other colleagues in ED, and they called you in to specifically answer the question, is this or is it not a CBRM incident, and not to deal with Charlie's therapy.
That's correct, yes.
But surely in those circumstances, the same therapeutic curiosity a clinician might have must also fall on the shoulders.
Sure, yeah. Like I said, there are elements that I can't recall, particularly with about the drugs that were administered by the paramedic team. I don't recall that information. I mean, that may be a failure in my memory. That may well have occurred. I may have well taken it on board, but I don't recall it.
But out of everybody's learning and looking forward from this incident, is there not something to be learnt from your own experience about how it was that you came to be in the position where you weren't aware of these things that could assist in learning how your clinical
weren't
colleagues...
aware of which things, please, Mr.
Sorry, in your own experience of you not being aware of the paramedics' observations, the symptoms they saw, that Charlie had had 2.6 milligrams of atropine, that Charlie had had the duodote and the oxime, you weren't aware of that, which obviously, setting aside its importance for your CBRM role, would have been important for your clinical colleagues to know. And what I'm trying to look forward to is there any learning about how that handover of paramedics' observations reaches treating clinicians within the trust that you're aware of or have been involved in?
Is this beyond the emergency department now?
Yes.
Well, I mean, that there is learning, but I presume that is the entire point of the electronic record. Once it's printed and goes in the patient's notes, I mean, I always teach junior doctors that you've got to look back through notes. So if I'm seeing a patient, I would go back through the notes, and that would include looking at an ambulance sheet as part of the sort of picture of that patient. So that's my own personal practice. I just assume that colleagues would do a similar thing when it came to dealing with patients. So that's kind of news to me, that the ITU staff don't necessarily read the paramedic handover or the paramedic's details. I certainly do when I see a patient and I've got to give an opinion from my own microbiological practice. But I'm not sure how I can, as an individual, teach, provide lessons on that. It's an assumption I make that most doctors should be practicing.
Should read the notes. Is that it?
Essentially, yes.
It may be, Dr. Russell, that's the answer. It doesn't need to be learning or teaching or different protocols, because any doctor should know you look back and read the records of the patient when they're a new patient to you.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. Have I left anybody else out? Right, this time, Dr. Russell, we have finished. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
There's no need to stay. You're, of course, welcome to watch or listen if you choose to, but there's no obligation any longer.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yes, Ms. Bottle.
So the next witness we have is V13A, but I'm told that we need a break of some 15 minutes before she can give evidence, because there will be some technical
adjustments.
adjustments. That's right, yes.
So be it. All right, 12 o'clock then. Yes, Miss Pottle.
Yes. Sir, you have before you witness V13A.
Thank you.
Please may the witness be sworn.
Please.
I do solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would you like to sit down, please, V13A? Speak to the microphones if you would, please.
Yes. V13A, I won't ask you your name. The chair has made an order granting you anonymity and directing that you be referred to by the cipher V13A. The ruling is dated the 7th of November, and it is available on the inquiry's website. The order also prevents any questioning which might lead to your identification. V13A, you prepared a statement for the inquiry, is that right?
Yes.
If we could pull that up, please. It's inquiry reference 006133, and that's page 1 there. And if we just turn to the last page, please. Yes. Have you had a chance to review the statement before giving evidence today?
Yes.
Is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Sir, with your leave, may that statement be adduced into evidence?
Yes, it should be, please.
Yes, thank you.
Have you got a hard copy of it there?
I do, thank you.
Yes. Well, I've said this to other people, but it matters each time. What I need to know is what you can tell me correctly. It may accord exactly with what's in the statement, or it may not. I don't know. You can use the statement to refresh your recollection if it helps. But what matters is what you tell me today.
Thank you.
Okay?
I'm going to begin by asking you about your professional background briefly and your role in the response. In 2018, at the time of the Salisbury and Amesbury poisonings, you were a senior official at Public Health England. Is that right?
Yes.
And Public Health England has since been disestablished, and it is its health protection and health security responsibilities were transferred to the UK Health Security Agency. Is that right?
Yes.
At the time of the events in question, Public Health England was responsible for protecting public health following the incidents. Is that right?
Yes.
You have expertise in the provision of public health medical advice, emergency responses, and health protection. Is that right?
Yes.
You helped to lead PHE's response together with Nick Gent, we've heard about, who was the senior medical advisor, but he has now left UK HSA. Is that right?
That's correct.
You also led together with Sir Paul Cosford, who was the medical director at the time, but he has now passed away. Is that right?
That is correct.
So he was a doctor.
Yes.
Are you medically qualified or
Yes.
not? You are.
So I think it's probably accurate to confirm that I had a leadership role, but it was to support Sir Paul Cosford, who was the medical director.
Yes.
Right.
As part of the response, you attended many internal PHE meetings. We'll come to look at the minutes in a moment, but that's right, isn't it? You also attended a SAGE group, is that right? And you were responsible for liaising with police colleagues and colleagues conducting the national level response. Is that right?
I had a role in all of those, but it was not solely me.
Yes, I see. And in your statement, you give evidence not simply about your own role, but you've provided an overview of PHE's role in the Salisbury and Amesbury incidents. Is that right?
That is correct, and that statement was in response to specific questions.
Yes, that you were asked by the inquiry legal team.
Yes.
Yes, that's right. You've explained in your statement, you've provided an overview of PHE's role in the incidents, and I'm looking here at paragraph 4 of your statement. Can you just tell us, at a high level, what Public Health England's role was in the response?
Public Health England's role in the response was to work collaboratively with other partners as part of that multi-agency response at a national and at a local level. And that included providing support to patient management, risk mitigating mitigating risk to potential contacts and public, and providing input to effective public health communications.
Yes, I think in your statement you say contributing to communications at a national and local level, including advising, warning, and informing the public.
Yes.
And we'll come on to, in your evidence, looking at some of the statements that were made by Professor Sir Paul Cosford as part of that role. Turning to the Salisbury poisonings, do you recall how you first became aware of the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal?
So my role was a national role, and we were advised of an incident occurring in that area by regional colleagues on the morning of the 5th of March.
So we know that the Skripals were taken ill on Sunday the 4th. So the next day you were informed by regional PHE colleagues, is that right?
That is correct.
Do you recall at that stage what information you were given?
It was very little information. So my recollection is a little bit hazy over the passage of time, but we were advised that 2 people had been taken into hospital and that they were very unwell, and there was very little clarity about anything further at that stage when we were very first notified of the situation. As the day progressed, more information gradually became available, and in any emerging incident, that is not unusual because you get more information over time.
Of course. Were you eventually told about the background of the Skripals?
Yes.
Was that on that day, the 5th of March, do you recall, or not?
I don't recollect specifically, but it's not unlikely.
Well, we'll come to the records now. We're going to look now at, in fact, I think we'll come to the 6th of March record first. But before we turn to it, the records I'm talking about are the SRG minutes, meeting minutes. Can you just tell us first, what was the SRG?
So PHE had, as part of its public health and health protection responsibilities, it had a functionality to be able to plan, prepare and respond to incidents affecting the public's health. And that included an incident response structure and processes that worked at a local, regional level and at a national level. And the SRG was the Strategic Response Group that was part of the national structure and processes that provided national oversight and support where an incident had been escalated to such a level that it couldn't just be managed by a local team. And there were various criteria that were considered to inform that escalation.
Okay. Well, let's turn now then to the minutes of the 6th of March. And I'm looking at inquiry reference for the transcript is 004702. We can see here on the first page the attendees of the meeting were Jenny Harries, who is the Strategic Incident Director, Mike Wade, who was the incident director, and then a number of attendees from Public Health England, and some attendees from the Department of Health. And Mr. Jonathan Van Tam attended from the Chief Medical Officer's office, and Nick Gent is there as well. And you've not attended, I think. Pardon me, neither did Nick Gent. We have apologies there from both of you. Is that right?
Yes, on the 6th, it had apologies from myself and from Dr. Gent.
Yeah. And so looking at this list of attendees, which varies over the different meetings, but they are primarily Public Health England officials, is that right?
Yes.
But then also some input from colleagues from other departments, like the Chief Medical Officers, the Department for Health.
It was, as I've just outlined, it was a Public Health England internal process,
Yes.
but other partners from the what we would call the health tripartite. So that would be Public Health England, DHSC, Department of Health and Social Care, and NHS England. We would collaborate, and so they got invited to our internal meetings, and quite often we were invited to their internal meetings.
I see. If we scroll to page 2 of this note, we can see here the third paragraph. It says one of the actions was for you, B13A, is setting up meetings in the morning to maximize any inflow of required information to support the public health management of the incident, which may be generally inaccessible due to appropriate security barriers to accessing the required information. Can you help us with this? Who were these meetings with? Do you recall?
I don't recall specifically who I met with.
I don't mean individuals,
Oh.
pardon me. I should be organizations. Was this meetings with the police or meetings with other central government departments?
I don't recall.
If we turn to page 3 of the minute, we can see at the very top there, public health risk is currently considered to be low. What was that assessment based on? You deal with it, if it helps, at paragraph 7 of your statement.
So the risk was initially considered to be low to the general public because the information available at that time was that a very limited number of people had become unwell, and it was not an issue affecting did not appear to be an issue affecting the broader population. And I think that is what was being considered at that stage. There were no other people who appeared to become unwell who may or may not have been contacts at that stage.
This is Tuesday. Was it in the morning, this meeting? I've forgotten.
Yes.
I believe it was first thing in the morning.
Yes, so it's Tuesday morning.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, Tuesday the 9th, Tuesday the 6th of March at 9 a.m.
Yep.
You've told us that at that stage you knew that there were it was known that a limited number of people had become unwell. Do you recall what other information was known at that time about the incident? If you can't recall, then you must say, but...
I don't recall the specific details.
Okay. In your statement, you say that close contacts of the victims had no symptoms, and there was no indication of environmental contamination. But the minutes also note, however, there's a need to gain a better understanding and provide an evidence-based assessment. Important to follow up on the whole blood results and any other clinical information immediately after the meeting. this evidence-based assessment, what would that look like?
This SRG was being informed by Professor Wade, who was, as you said, the incident director.
Yeah.
And so he would have been liaising with his multi-agency colleagues at a local level in Salisbury and be as well as informed as anybody at that stage. The evidence-based assessment would be to understand where there may or may not have been contamination, where people may or may not have been exposed to that contamination, and what that contamination might be like, how it would be characterised.
I see. And there's a reference here to the whole blood results, and so we know that the blood of the Skripals was being tested, and that results were released later on the 6th of March, so after this meeting. So I suppose what they're talking about here is finding out what the actual contaminant was.
Yes, that was unknown at that stage. It had
Yes.
yet to be confirmed.
Okay.
I ought to remember, Mrs. Pottle, by this time, Tuesday morning, is it known that there's a acetylcholinesterase inhibition at work or not?
At that stage, the Skripals are being treated for that.
Quite.
My understanding is that it was by the end of the day that the results were released by DSTL.
Yes, but they'd been to Birmingham first, hadn't they?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
My recollection, sorry, it's a while ago since we heard the evidence from Dr. G.
I'm sure you're right that the eventual confirmation of an agent, a nerve agent, came later on Tuesday.
Yes.
All right, but there's something.
Yeah.
The cholinesterase inhibition angle was already known
In the hospital, yes.
in the hospital, certainly.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember whether you knew about it by then or not? It's quite difficult to put yourself back into individual slots in the timetable.
So if I'm referring to my own knowledge or to the knowledge from the Strategic Response Group, at 9 o'clock in the morning, it is unlikely that we would have had that information if it only became available on the Tuesday morning.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to take you now to the statement put out by Wiltshire Police on that day at 3 o'clock. If we can take that up, it's INQ 006153, page 4. On that day, there was no statement released by Public Health England on the 6th of March. That's right, isn't it? And if we scroll down, please, we can see here in the statement released by the police, it says, the advice from Public Health England remains that, based on the evidence to date, currently there doesn't appear to be any immediate risk to the public. And can you just help us, how would that, there would be liaising with the police, is that at the local level to release that advice?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
But that would, sorry, if I can just expand on that.
Yes.
That would have been both through Professor Wade as the incident director and his colleagues, but also through our respective communications teams.
I see. When you say our respective communications teams, are you talking about the communications teams for Public Health England and the police, or?
Yes.
I see. If we can move on then to inquiry reference 004739. These are the minutes of the SRG meeting from the 7th of March. This is a meeting that you did attend, 9:30 in the morning. We can see that Jenny Harries attended. Mike Wade was not present at that meeting, and neither was Nick Gent. And if we scroll down, please, to actions, at the very bottom there, it says, V13A will share information at the 12 o'clock meeting today. In your statement, you say that there was a closed meeting on that day. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I think in your statement, you say that you couldn't recall attending that meeting, but you have produced some records from that meeting last week. Is that right?
I do not recall attending that meeting, but there is documented evidence that I attended.
I see. I see. Well, we'll just continue with the minutes of this meeting for a moment. It's clear that the substance was confirmed as an organophosphate incident, and the incident status on page 2, you can just look there. So it says it remains a PHE enhanced incident. JH, that would be Jenny Harries, is that right?
Yes.
Noted, the way the incident is being managed at a national level is now changed, as the incident is being led by counterterrorism police, who will have oversight at a national level. Local arrangements with Wiltshire Police will therefore change. This will impact in 2 ways. Number 1, practical issues. There will no longer be remote teleconferences for security issues. Decision-making will be done at the national level, and PHE therefore needs to be mindful of staff being present at meetings and managing accordingly. Is this a reference, can you help us, to PHE being present at these national meetings, or what meetings are they talking about here in the minutes?
I think it is being mindful of the need for staff to be able to be present at those meetings, but also that in order to do that, they would need to be able to travel.
Yes,
So they may be perhaps less efficient in their use of time.
I see. And national meetings, would that include SAGE meetings, for example?
Yes.
And as we already established, you had attended, I think, 2 SAGE meetings, is that right?
I believe so.
Okay. And then if we turn on to page 3 here, this is in the situation update, which was conducted by Jenny Harries. It says, risk assessments may vary at different locations, depending on location and different levels of exposure. This will be discussed at the closed meeting today at 12 o'clock. The key public health impacts will then be identified for forward planning. And then no wider public health surveillance is required, as if there were wider public health effects, people would have presented. A number of sites remained cordoned off and will be reviewed with respect to impact and timescale of exposure. The sites are also scenes of crime. There's a reference here to the risk assessment being discussed. Do you think, is that a reference to a documented risk assessment?
The risk assessment, to the best of my knowledge, was not documented, but it is possible to trace forward from other meetings from this to see how the work was progressed.
I see. Well, let's continue then. We have the minutes of the closed meeting on the 7th of March. Well, calling them minutes might be slightly overly ambitious, but if we can look at document INQ 006191, page 2, please. Thank you. If we just look at the bottom here to make sense of the document. So this is a document which was shared last week. It's an email chain. And we can see the email is dated the 6th of March. It's sent from CCS, which sits in the Cabinet Office. And I think we heard from Sir John Aston that they are responsible, for example, for setting up COBRA meetings, and they're the Civil Contingency Secretariat, I believe. The email is sent to D84U, who's an official at the Department of Health, Jenny Harries, Jonathan Van Tam from the CMO's office, Nick Gent, Georgina Collins, a number of individuals, including yourself. And the subject is calling notice, in-depth health risk assessment of ongoing situation. And it explains that it's a calling notice, so to take it literally, telling you about a call that you're expected to attend, to be present on, is that right?
It was basically to advise of a meeting rather than a call.
It's a summons, isn't it?
Polite.
Yeah, polite summons. And the summons, if we can put it that way, says this is a chance for PHE to conduct a more in-depth health risk assessment of the ongoing situation. And then if we can scroll up now, please. This is an email sent on the 7th of March at 4:30 about, so after the meeting takes place. And it is from the Cabinet Office to those attendees at the meeting. And if we scroll down a bit, please, thank you. It says, "Dear all, please see below for the actions from the meeting at 12 o'clock today to be treated sensitively. 1. PHE to produce an updated risk assessment." Do you recall the updated risk assessment being discussed at that meeting?
At that noon meeting, I recall it. Well, I don't recall the meeting, as I've previously said, but I believe that it would have been agreed, as has been put in an action, that PHE would need to revisit the risk assessment.
And can you help us with this? Why would there be a need to revisit the risk assessment?
So a risk assessment relies on what information is available, and particularly, as I've already indicated, in the first few hours and days when responding to an incident, the available information changes.
Yes.
And therefore, as you have new information, it's useful to revisit that risk assessment. And it may well be that the output doesn't change, but it's very good practice to go through the process.
Yes, of course. And by this stage, it was known, wasn't it, that it was an organophosphate poisoning. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So it follows that that would have been one of the new factors to be considered at the updated risk assessment.
It would be a factor to consider.
Yeah, okay. Do you agree that this is a reference to a document?
A risk assessment is a process that is usually documented.
Because here the minute is to produce an updated risk assessment. So do you agree that the Cabinet Office here would be expecting a document that would contain the updated risk assessment?
As I've already indicated, I don't recall the meeting. I can't specify what the output was expected to be.
Okay. But in the end, there was no documented updated risk assessment produced. Is that right?
I'm not aware of a formal documented risk assessment at this stage.
Okay. The second minute is PHE to produce a reasonable worst case scenario for potential impacts in the event of source location. In the end, and we'll come to the emails in a moment, this action in particular, the Department of Health volunteered to take on producing that document, and they produced a reasonable worst case scenario. That's right, isn't it?
I believe from the documentation I've seen recently, and I've only seen that since I completed my statement, my understanding is that that was a first draft. I don't believe it was a final document that we've seen.
I see.
But prepared by the Department of Health. Is that right?
It appears so, yes.
Yes.
Right.
We'll come to the email in a moment, which confirms that. But before we do, there's also a minute here that says PHE to liaise with DSTL and NHS England to produce an updated mitigation strategy. Do you see that?
I do.
Can you help us? What is a mitigation strategy?
Well, it would be the actions that could mitigate risks that had been identified.
Okay. And are you aware of any documented mitigation strategy being prepared by PHE?
I'm not aware of a single document, but I'm aware of a number of mitigations that were put in place.
I see. Can you just help us with what those mitigations were?
So the mitigations included, and they may not be complete, so apologies in advance, they included PHE's ongoing support with DSTL to the clinical management of patients in hospital. And they included ensuring that there was consistent and ongoing contact tracing for people who may have been exposed, with an assessment protocol that included a follow-up and then a referral into a clinical assessment in hospital, should that be considered helpful, and to work with DSTL and Salisbury District Hospital around a protocol for assessment of those people. It included ongoing support for first responders, both through their organisations, and I believe Sir Paul Cosford made public statements, I think on the 7th, in support of that. And then there was ongoing work that would progress over time, including ongoing multi-agency communications. I think that was the start of taking forward work around working with the NHS England, to put out existent advice on organophosphates to emergency departments and GPs in particular, but I think NHS England distributed that far more widely, and also to update NHS 111 pathways for members of the public contacting NHS 111, and that is just some of those immediate things. But there was a lot of community engagement as well that happened by PHE, the NHS, and working with local partners on an ongoing basis.
And so these mitigation measures were to mitigate the risks associated with the Novichok attack, is that right?
To mitigate identified risks.
Yes. And so, for example, the contact tracing would be to mitigate the risk of people who would come into contact with the Skripals, is that right?
Yes.
And when you say identified risks, I suppose reading between the lines, what you're getting at there is the not looking at a discarded container, if I can put it that way, but looking at the sites that had been identified as being contaminated. Is that right?
This was very much relying on what information was available.
Yes, but could you just address the question that you were asked? Would you like to ask it again?
You said in your answer that you were looking at the risks of Novichok that had been identified, and I think what you meant was looking at sites or locations that had been identified as being contaminated by Novichok, not considering the scenario of a discarded container of Novichok. Is that right? At that stage?
At that stage, I think those locations were identified as places that the Scripples had visited rather than contamination was confirmed.
I see.
So contaminated or might be,
Yes.
right?
I see.
But it was where there was some evidence of potential contamination.
I see.
I see. The minute to produce an updated mitigation strategy. So you've told us of what some of the mitigation measures were. Presumably, the strategy document was to help decide or help officials take decisions about what mitigations to put in place or which ones to prioritize. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I believe this is dealt with in further minutes in subsequent days.
Okay. I'm going to take you now to the top email in this document, pardon me. So this is an email on the 8th of March of 2018, so the day after those actions were circulated. It's from an official at the Department of Health, and it's to a number of officials, including you and Nick Gent, and I think, in fact, all the attendees. And it says, "Hi, Jenny." I presume that's Jenny Harries, the
Yes.
incident director. "Aware that you're all very busy on all of this, would you like us to take on the second action below, i.e. the reasonable worst case scenario for a second incident today? Of course, working closely with you on the specific detail." So the mention here to reasonable worst case scenario for a second incident implies that at that meeting there was discussed the possibility of a second incident of poisoning. Do you agree with that?
That is what that email would suggest.
Okay. I'm going to take you now to the, well, in fact, before we do that, just for the transcript, there is confirmation in another email, which has been disclosed, that PHE would appreciate the help of the Department of Health, and that's how the document is produced in the end. We don't need to go to it now, but for the transcript, the reference is 6194.
Right. Offer accepted. Is that it?
We'll have enough documents to get through, I think.
Yes,
If we could,
but what you've just told me about is that there is evidence that the offer made on the email that you've just shown us was accepted.
yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes. If we can go then to this reasonable worst case scenario, which is reference 4704, page 3, please. So this was produced by the Department of Health, and I think you referred to it as a draft, you think? It was produced on the 15th of March. In fact, is this page 3? Pardon me. Yeah, okay, perfect.
I believe it's referred to as a first draft.
I see. It sets out a number of incidents which would comprise the reasonable worst case scenario, and number 2 is the one we're particularly interested in. It says accidental discovery of a discarded agent by humans. This paper focuses on the first two scenarios, it says, and then if we scroll down, so the reasonable worst case assumptions are for the second possibility, accidental discovery of a discarded source material by humans. Up to 6 members of the public are exposed to a source material used and then discarded after the Salisbury incident, including up to 3 children. Material is found in public but not a crowded area. And then it goes on to consider there could be 1 fatality, for example, and contamination to a number of other casualties, and up to 50 people exposed to secondary contamination. And before we go further down the document, this rather suggests, doesn't it, that at an early stage, at that meeting on the 7th of March, that there was, at that stage even, consideration of an accidental discovery of a discarded source.
Well, does it?
The meeting at the 7th of March asked for a reasonable worst-case scenario to be completed. I don't think there's evidence that it had been discussed at that meeting. I think it was the task was given out.
I see. But you told us a moment ago that you don't recall being at that meeting.
I don't recall being at that meeting, but I have attended and I continue to attend those sorts of meetings where when task is given out, the task has not already been discussed in detail at that meeting.
Of course. But the email, and we don't need to go back to it, but the email which sets out the action says PHE to produce a reasonable worst-case scenario for potential impacts in the event of source location. I thought you had agreed with me a moment ago that that could be a reference to the location of the Novichok, including a source.
If I may clarify, at this time we did not know where and how the Scripples had been poisoned. And when we're talking about a source in those first few days, I think most of the focus was on where and how they had been poisoned.
I see. In this document, we have clear consideration by the Department of Health of an accidental discovery of a discarded source. And what I wanted to ask you about this document in particular, which was, in fact, sent to D84U, who's another official at the Department of Health, on the 15th of March, so quite a while later. Do you recall seeing that document in March?
I am not familiar with this document. I do not recall ever having seen it before, and I do not know how it was used, if it was used.
Well, who's it been sent to?
We have an email showing that it was sent to D84U on the 15th of March.
Who is?
An official at the Department of Health.
So it's within the Department of Health?
Yes.
Yes. And PHE correspondence or not?
I don't believe we have correspondence from PHE.
Right. And did you not see it?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Did anybody in your department tell you that they'd seen it?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Right.
You were at the meeting where the action was set. You didn't follow up to find out what had come of that action?
Following the action and following the email where DHSC undertook to take the task forward and to contact us should they require specific input, we would have expected contact from them.
Quite.
And so you don't think, but I suppose you can't really tell us, but you don't think that DHSC ever brought it to PHE's attention. Is that your evidence?
There's no evidence to confirm that.
Can you help us with this more general question? What would be the benefit of producing a reasonable worst case scenario document like this?
I mean, the role of doing a reasonable worst case scenario is to be able to consider potential, extreme impacts, and a sort of worst case, reasonable worst case is what it says, worst case, as opposed to the most likely case.
Of course. But wouldn't consideration of that reasonable worst case scenario be something that Public Health England would be required to undertake as part of its public protection responsibilities?
Public Health England would use this sort of assessment to inform ongoing risk mitigations.
And in this case, I take it your evidence is that that didn't happen because you'd never seen that document, certainly.
How work went forward, I'm not able to specify. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what happened to this document. I don't know whether it stayed in the Department of Health and Social Care or whether it was used in subsequent meetings.
Do you agree that this document could have assisted in formulating advice, which later was given in July, to members of the public, not to pick up anything that they hadn't dropped themselves?
It would have contributed towards the thinking towards such advice.
Yes. Would you agree with me that it would be incumbent on Public Health England to make inquiries to either get this document from the Department of Health or undertake the analysis itself to better inform its risk mitigation actions?
So to inform risk mitigation actions, you need to use a risk assessment rather than a supposed worst case scenario, because actually you need some evidence to inform mitigations.
But I believe you told us just a moment ago that Public Health England would use this sort of assessment to inform ongoing risk mitigations.
It would be to inform the thinking, I believe, towards ongoing risk mitigations.
Well, it doesn't actually say thinking in the transcript, but I don't think we have to quibble over that. But I think we're agreed, aren't we, that it would be relevant to those ongoing mitigations, this kind of document, a reasonable worst case scenario.
Well, now, do you agree with that or not?
So may I just explain a little bit about the process of risk assessment and how it would inform risk mitigations? That might be helpful.
Yes, please. Please do.
So a risk assessment will actually take available information and actually consider it from a number of different perspectives. And it is something that is not just a desktop exercise, but is assisted if there is some discussion by the relevant subject matter experts. So to do that, it is helpful from a public health risk assessment to have public health specialists, relevant scientists at the very least, with the available evidence. And that evidence will identify what the risk, and then you can identify or consider risk mitigations that are proportionate to both the risk and the available evidence. A reasonable worst case scenario is actually thinking what could happen, but actually there is no evidence that it would happen.
And so, following that through, are you saying that because there's no evidence that it would happen, that you don't need to take account of it when setting your strategies? for risk mitigation?
I've just explained that actually risk mitigation relies on evidence-based approach.
No, look, please face the question. The question is, would a document such as this, which apparently you haven't seen but we know existed within the Department of Health and Social Security, would that, Health and Social Care, would it be relevant to a risk assessment contributing to your decisions about how to go about reducing the risk?
It would be taken into consideration alongside, but would not be the core information into the risk assessment, because the risk assessment relies on available evidence.
Because it's not evidence-based, it's hypothetical.
Yes.
I see.
But following that through logically, a discarded container would always be a hypothetical risk, I suppose, until it's actually found. But at that point, it would be too late to put in place those mitigations. So, do you agree?
At this stage, we had no understanding of how the organophosphate came to poison the scripples. So it's very difficult to make that step.
Yes, but I'll move on from this in a moment. But clearly at this stage, there were officials in the Department of Health considering the very possibility, which eventually occurred, that there could be an accidental discovery of a discarded source. And is your evidence that even though you've never seen this document, it doesn't matter because it wouldn't have informed PHE's actions?
PHE would and did consider all kinds of hypothetical possibilities, but actions need to have some evidence base.
Okay, we'll move on from this document, and I'd like to take you to, just for the record, the advice given by PHE on that day, which is recorded in INQ 0004738 at page 3. And this is a statement given by Paul Cosford on the 7th of March. And it records, all known first responders have been contacted through their organizations and encouraged to seek further advice should they experience any symptoms. The sites recently visited by the 2 people affected have all been secured, and PHE is reminding local clinicians of the symptoms to look out for. Based on current evidence, the risk to the wider public is low, and it is likely that, had any member of the public been exposed to the substance, they would have presented with symptoms by now. However, anyone who is in the area and is concerned because they feel unwell should dial 111 or 999, depending on the severity of their symptoms. So that was advice given on the 7th of March. And if we just continue the chronology, there was an SRG meeting on the 8th of March, but I'm not going to take you to the minutes. If we go then to the meeting on the 9th of March, which is reference INQ 004745. This meeting took place at 12:30. We can see the attendees on page 1, which include you and Jenny Harries. If we scroll down to page 3, the last paragraph, please. So it says the cross-government risk assessment meeting is happening now. sharing high-level secure information, NG in attendance. And we know that that's not the SAGE meeting because the SAGE meeting took place on the 9th of March at 4 o'clock. So this was an earlier meeting, which you didn't attend. There's been no record produced of that meeting, is that right? That you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And if we turn then to page, well, in fact, if we just stay there for a second.
Seems to have been considering high-level secure information, doesn't it?
Yes.
That's what it says anyway. Yep.
And then underneath that, there's a meeting at 2 o'clock with the Department of Health and Social Care, NHS England, PHE, and the Chief Medical Officer. Further meeting at 3 o'clock by DHSC. So a number of meetings on the 9th of March, if I can put it that way.
Yes.
And then if we turn over to page 4, it says, police have identified more sites of interest with regards to primary source of origination of substance and sites for discarded unused substance. There are ongoing concerns to the ongoing risk of public health, which is why the risk assessment formation is so important. And then it says NICENT will be able to provide parameters around the individual risk. So here, and I think this was a meeting that you had attended, it's clear that PHE have been passed information from the police about the sites for discarded unused substance. Do you recall that?
So I think the locations being referred to here were those locations around Salisbury, which the police identified and cordoned off.
But it says sites for discarded unused substance. Unused rather suggests that it's not secondary contamination, if I can put it that way. But Novichok that's not been used yet. You were at the meeting.
I was at the meeting.
Would you agree with me that there was a discussion here of a discarded unused substance?
That's what that reads, yes, that there was a possibility.
Okay. And if we look just a bit further down the page, PHE response, it says overall quite a considerable concern with regards to the further identified sites of interest. What we are moving towards is to relay messages to the public around not picking up any unidentified containers and reassurance that there are decontamination measures in place and zoonotic surveillance. So I think this makes clear, doesn't it, that there's a concern about a discarded unused substance because, in fact, the discussion of the advice is not to pick up any identified containers. That suggests that what you're worried about is a container of unused Novichok. Would you agree with me there?
It was identified as a potential issue.
Okay.
Yes.
No, come on, that won't do. It's not whether it's identified as a possible issue. What I want to know is what you remember about the discussion, please.
I don't remember the discussion, but I have copies of. Familiar with the minutes, and they were a summary of the discussion,
Right.
which indicated that the discussion identified that there was a possibility that there was discarded substance. So
And, by the look of it, some discussion of the possibility of messaging the public about that danger.
it was considered, yes.
Right, well, what, if anything, where did the discussion get to?
It was raised at that meeting and noted at that meeting,
Yes,
and I don't know where it went to thereafter, but if you read down to, I believe, the actions from that meeting, identified that certainly Jenny Harris was taking things into a meeting at the Department of Health and Social Care, and that, as we've already seen earlier on in the minutes, that Nick Gent, Dr. Gent was working on a risk assessment. So I would, it is likely that the discussion would have gone forward to those other meetings later in the day. I do not know. I was not present physically at those later meetings.
So you think that that possibility that is there adverted to as perhaps moving towards or something like that would have gone on to subsequent meetings at which you weren't present?
I think it would have been discussed.
Okay.
Right.
Would it be fair to say that there's no record of a decision by PHE not to take forward that advice?
So PHE, there is no record, no. PHE's role was to provide advice as part of that overarching incident response. So it was not working unilaterally. So any public health messaging would have been and was discussed with other partners at a national level, working across government, and the proportionality and appropriateness of messaging would have been agreed across that incident response.
Yeah. What we're trying to get at is whether anybody knows whether a decision was made about it.
Yes. I mean, you've said that you think maybe Nick Gent or Jenny Harries would have discussed it at other meetings, but we don't have a record of that, do we? To show that they did.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Sir, I'm going to move on now, but it's a bit of a longer topic. I wonder if now would be an appropriate time to break for lunch.
Yes, of course. Shall we say 2 o'clock? V13A, you're in the middle of giving your evidence, so please don't discuss it with other people in the meantime. Could you be back, please, at 2 o'clock to start again?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All rise.